Okay, so today we are starting with TheKavernacle, and there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. So let me do what I want. God damn it. Okay, I added that. God damn it. There's a bit of editorializing, but yeah. I mean, just based off the title, I mean, this is an idea that I've heard in real life and also seen in fiction in various ways. Like it's basically just the insistence that because the powers that be in our lives, which cause a lot, maybe even the majority of our suffering, are so big and powerful, we might as well just become hedonists and enjoy whatever we can in this fucked up life instead of trying futilely to take on the powers that be. Yeah, so when someone comes along and insists on trying to do the right thing, trying to change things, we that can be real fucking annoying because it's like you put some cracks in those hedonistic justifications, but at the same time, you can't just accept that because the powers that be are too powerful. Because you've accepted in your heart of hearts that that it's impossible to do anything about that. Anything that tempts you to question that belief is just annoying distraction. So you're like, just let me do what I want, god damn it. And but of course, not everyone believes like that. Not everyone believes that it's so impossible to take on the forces controlling our lives. But it's definitely impossible if you're just doing it on your own. So, enough of my yapping. Well, we'll let Mr. Kavernacle yap.
Tired of activists just jumping up and down, treating other activists like shit because they're consuming Coca-Cola or eating McDonald's. They then degrade them, being like, well, you support Palestine, blah, blah, blah. Why are you doing that to those children? You are holding a mobile phone in your hand that is mined with rare earth minerals that from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Do you know any of the implications of that?
There is no ethical.
Oh, damn. I mean, okay, yeah, I also heard that one. I was not expecting to go that direction. I was imagining like I guess I was imagining activists talking to non-activists, trying to break through the learned helplessness. I was not anticipating to be, I guess, activist on activist violence like that. I mean, it would be very hypocritical of me to be saying shit like that. And I'm sitting here nice and pretty in my freaking office closet with a freaking not just a phone, like a display tablet over here, a second monitor, vertical monitor over there, and fucking monitor in front of me and all that shit. Drinking pretty from my glass of clean water, I mean, you gotta accept some levels of I guess not ethical consumption. I mean, I don't know. I feel like the answer in that situation is not to lower yourself to I don't know, like the lowest possible state. I mean, wouldn't it be better to try and raise up the people being enslaved to like make your clothing and your phones so that they can enjoy the same kind of the same living standards as you, like rather than going after the random citizens who are just. I mean, frankly, we have no choice but to use things like essentially phones nowadays. When if you want a job, you kind of need a phone. I mean, that kind of noble quote unquote pauperism is like. I mean, that only defends the status quo, right? Like, there's no way for that to result in any meaningful change to the state of the world, right? Like, it isn't it only. I mean, what's the word? Like, at best, it's just self-satisfaction for the person who is, eschewing all these unethically created and sourced goods and services. It's like. I mean, okay, dude, the system. I mean, I guess that's where I started this video. I was talking about the non-activist who has accepted the status quo in their heart of hearts and can't imagine changing it. I guess now we're talking about the so-called activist who has accepted the status, despite their protestations. Otherwise, they have accepted the status quo in their heart of hearts and cannot truly imagine changing it. So they just, so their best solution is just, what's the word? Throw their hands up and nobly remove themselves from the situation. Which, I mean, to be fair, I have, unless how to phrase it, unless politically coded situations, I'll admit I do tend to have very similar approach to problems. I like interpersonal social problems. In my personal life, yeah, that is often, especially when I was younger, how I have approached things. This is where my natural instincts take me. So I can't really be pointing fingers here, right?
Consumption under capitalism. If you're
based Sonic, I've been yapping over here for like who knows how long. I didn't even didn't even recognize our boy Sonic with his basedness.
There is no ethical consumption under capitalism. If you're even vaguely aware of politics on social media, you have heard this phrase. A phrase that is very obvious on the surface, but how people use it is very, very different. And I wanted to speak about this today. I'm sure you've seen lots of videos on this topic before, but it's basically what people take this to mean. And I want to talk about like my own views on the phrase, and it is a true phrase, but even the way like both sides view it is kind of interesting. The side that are like, well, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, therefore you must consume more ethically. And the others who say there is no ethical consumption, therefore it's all equally bad and don't make me feel bad for consuming at all.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about at the beginning.
I just wanted to talk about that contrast because we have a really fun article to read today. And if the thumbnail hasn't spoiled it, I want to like kind of build it up. I want to read the author's previous work that came out a year ago and contrast it to the article they put out last week, which shows even if you have suffered under the capitalist system, once you get in the position of the capitalists themselves, you don't give a shit anymore. And I feel like fundamentally that is the terrible brainwashing of neoliberalism, that you can go through something terrible and you recognize it's because of the economic system. But when you're in that same position, or potentially you could be in that same position, you choose to do it as well because, well, if it's all bad, I might as well. So I want to talk about that today. But before we go any further, if you want to follow me on social media at TheKavernacle on Bluesky and on Instagram, if you want to support my work, check me out on Patreon and YouTube memberships. And also, if you like this video after you've watched it, consider giving it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. So before we get into the examples I want to talk about, yes, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. I think for leftists is like a very obvious phrase. And I think when you're just saying it as a statement of fact, I think it can be helpful, right? So if you're like myself, you're saying there is no ethical consumption under capitalism because the system is fundamentally flawed. That could be labor exploitation. That could be like these terrible corporations that like poison communities or just destroy natural environments for profit. And then
yes, like a lot of the AI data centers that have been popping up recently. I remember when the NFT things came out, people were talking about the environmental impact of them. I never looked into it too much. I didn't know. Even to say, I don't know how they compare to the recent trend of the LLMs, but definitely. I mean, yeah, that's a great example of the utter unethicality of consumption under capitalism. And really, it's more like that's less consumption and more production. Even I've never heard that one before. There is no ethical production under capitalism.
And sell you something like, for example, iPhones and just general smartphones. We know that they are made using either child labor or very exploited labor, and it's based on minerals that are found in places like Congo,
So there's always
which has been like,
notes down
absolutely
here.
devastated by Western imperialism and just global imperialism to make these products, right? So we recognize that. But I think that the phone is a good example. So I bought this like secondhand. I buy all my phones secondhand pretty much. I don't think I've ever bought the latest iPhone in my life. I don't even think I've ever bought a new iPhone in my life. And I think that is like kind of like what we're talking about with like more ethical consumption. So we know the product of the iPhone itself is bad. It's made of exploitative labor. It enriches a bad corporation, has a bad effect on the world. But through buying it secondhand, at least we're not buying and adding into the demand for these products, and we're not contributing to things like waste. So there hasn't been like more exploitation going into this product, but this product is still like a testament to capitalist exploitation. And I feel like most leftists who say this as a statement of fact will also recognize that for a lot of people it's impossible to be an ethical consumer or try and be as ethical as possible because your economic position doesn't really allow that. If you're in a food desert in America, for example, or you just need to eat at McDonald's, you're going to do that. And I think most leftists are not going to judge in this system. And I would say any leftist who starts judging people for doing that is still brainwashed by neoliberalism and individualism, thinking that your consumer choices are the be-all and end-all of like your own personal morality. And I think that's wrong to start thinking about that. And I also think it's wrong to get too hung up on this point, especially when
that is, I mean, especially if you're in any fandom spaces at all. And I mean, even me as someone who purposely avoids fandom spaces because of this thing I'm about to talk about, I mean, you've definitely seen the way people, so many people try to make whatever, like, the way that, they try to turn in these very prosaic, like kind of too simple to be true ways. Like, the way you consume media or whatever, the kind of media you consume, they try to make that. They try to draw these very simple conclusions about what that means about you as a person. And it's like, I mean, yeah, obviously there are some, conclusions you can draw from what media people consume, but I mean, it's rarely as cut and dried, as black and white, as point A to point B, as it is, like, I don't know, how it's demonstrated in any sort of social media fandom space, adjacent place.
When you're dealing with politics that target the masses and class solidarity, getting so hung up on every single individual's consumer choices, I think, is really wrong. Of course, our power in a consumer capitalist economy is things like boycotts, and I totally advocate that, and I'm happy those exist. And that is some semblance of power we have over these companies. We've seen recently, actually, loads of giant corporations are having terrible, terrible quarters because of things, partly because of boycotts and partly because their price gouging is so insane. So just general consumers aren't going there anymore. So that is absolutely fine. But like I said,
that's like an example of being organized and doing something about it. Because I was mentioning back in the beginning of this video that, like, there's not much you can do about the powers that be by yourself. But, if you're working together with other people, organizing, making big collective action, suddenly it becomes a lot easier to do things. Like, I mean, it's kind of like a basic fact of the world that numbers kind of beat out basically everything. Like, the person with the bigger numbers, they kind of almost always win, even if they're not right, which is a weird kind of fairness, I guess you could say.
Start going absolutely mad about everyone's individual consumption. I think that is just the path. I think that is just the path to nowhere. And that is kind of the point with recognizing the unethical system is, sometimes people are going to consume badly, and that doesn't make them an absolutely terrible person. But then I do also understand the argument.
Especially if they don't know anything about the production of the commodities in our lives. Like, someone who doesn't know that the shirt on their back was made in some Chinese sweatshop. Like I don't know if it makes sense to condemn them for that. Now if you tell them about it and they're like, well, better them than me or something like that, then yeah, you can start side-eyeing them. But like, I mean, most people are just ignorant of the things they're stepping on to survive, and then
there are levels. And for example, if you are over consuming, let's say with fast fashion, you don't need it. You can buy clothes secondhand. You can buy clothes more sustainably that will even last longer. And yes, we have that argument of maybe sometimes with fast fashion, let's say Primark in the UK, it is cheaper and we won't judge people. But if you have the economic means and you're still buying this stuff, then yeah, it's totally fine to judge people for that. And it would be good if people did that less. I don't think that is the main point of leftist politics, and I don't think that's the thing you should get hung up on, because it still is the corporations making these products with, exploitative labor, and also brainwashing everyone into wanting it. Like we've seen viral Dubai chocolate Labubu matcha recently. That's all because of like viral marketing and brainwashing, right? So I think we have to think about the people who make the money more than the individuals. But yes, it is good to educate individuals to not do this, because like I said, even with giant corporations like Starbucks and McDonald's right now, they're not having a great time. And that is partly because of things like boycotts. So now let's get into this kind of mindset where I guess when I said in my video the other week about being a bit of a doomer and not an optimist when it comes to global politics, you can take the doomer route of, well, as an individual, me boycotting that company is not going to do anything. Therefore, if I like the product, I should just buy them instead. And that is the mindset a lot of people have. You saw this a lot, and I got loads of shit, even from other leftists. Do you remember Hogwarts Legacy? Is that Harry Potter game that came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I said, it's like the bare minimum as a leftist to not buy it, because you're personally enriching someone who is using that money to do terrible things, right? J.K. Rowling. And she has bragged about that. All you have to do is not play the wizard game. But so many people went like hysterical, like, oh, it's my childhood, all this other fucking bullshit. And like, if you can't boycott like one wizard game, you're actually hopeless, right?
So to be fair, I can't stand on my high horse here. I don't play video games at all, so it was very easy for me to just, wash my hands of the whole thing, kind of just do my own thing.
But in this discourse, I saw this just looking on Twitter for some old coverage about it. So XQC, you're trying to make people feel bad for purchasing a video game. And underneath an upvoted comment has a meme saying, got any decent fatherly advice for me? Don't let anyone tell you can't buy Hogwarts Legacy.
This just feels like citizen propaganda or something. Yeah, oh my lord. Yeah, classic. This is like classic fucking cynicism logic, basically. Like this, how to phrase, like all the tells are there. Like the people who are advocating for like higher ideals are really just hypocrites.
Remember that there is no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism. No matter what you buy, you are supporting some sort of unethical practice. So by their own logic, these people shouldn't buy anything at all. In the end, they are just hypocrites who like to hold others to impossibly high ethical standards that they themselves don't follow. Again, it's just total bullshit. Like, yeah, you have to live in a society. Do you need Hogwarts Legacy? No. Do you need a smartphone? Pretty much at this point, you do need a smartphone to participate in society right now. Again, there are levels, and we recognize that, and we recognize the fundamental point, but you don't need Hogwarts Legacy. The same way you don't need loads of Temu shit, the same way you don't need loads of Shein stuff, especially if you're a consumer who has a bit of means to make the actual choice, then these things are not the same, and you're not a hypocrite for saying that, yeah, you should not play Hogwarts Legacy and enrich someone like J.K. Rowling, but at the same time, we recognize, although unethically made as well, you need a smartphone. You can see that the argument wasn't made initially to say something like that. It was more to justify, like, oh, you shouldn't be angry at me because you're a hypocrite. And people constantly do this to make sure you're not angry at people for doing this and buying brands from shitty places. And if you're like a YouTuber or a streamer taking sponsorships from shitty companies, they will say, oh, well, there's no ethical consumption, so I might as well do it. It reminds me kind of a little bit, popped in my head, the chorus thing, where there were like a fair few leftists like TikTokers saying, oh, it's not actually bad because we all need money. It's not actually bad to take dark money off the Democratic Party. Again, I think it's like morally bankrupt when you have economic means to not have any standards. You guys know, if you've been following me long enough, I don't do sponsorships with like Israeli companies and pretty much any company I find like shitty. So I'm not just gonna like sell you any product just because someone pays me if it's shitty, exploitative. But again, this philosophy of there's no ethical consumption so I can do what I want just results in more people participating in a bad system and becoming bad actors in that system that make people's lives worse. And on that note, let's get into this. So if you haven't had this spoiled for you, let me take you on a wild ride. So there's a journalist who has written for the New York Times, Vogue, The Independent, The Telegraph, The Sunday Times, called Rhiannon Picton James. And
Interesting
they have
name.
articles like, I only realized my husband was right-wing after we got married.
Oof.
But they also have
I've heard
an
that
article,
story before.
which I feel like a lot of people could relate to in our current system, that she says, I regret being a renter. We were evicted as my daughter started school. And this article came out about a year ago. And might I also note before we get started, there was something that Adam Smith, the father of capitalism.
Yeah, what? Okay, wait. It's kind of interesting title. Like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like if you're in a position where you're, because for most people, when we rent, we're not doing it because we want to. We're doing it because we kind of have no choice but to do it. So it would be weird to describe that, to describe regret when the situation ends poorly. I kind of, I guess, one, I guess an easy solution is just that her and her family were wealthy enough that they didn't have to rent, but they chose to do it because, well, I guess because of the flexibility. But then obviously they had to suffer under the like an imperious hand of the renter, the landlord.
We get started. There was something that Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, and Winston Churchill all agreed upon. What did they all agree on? That landlords were all parasites. But on the Adam Smith subreddit, they've also got a couple of quotes from Adam Smith, mainly from The Wealth of Nations, but also just from Smith himself. So The Wealth of Nations, the rent of the land, therefore, considered as the price paid for the use of the land, is naturally a monopoly price. It's not at all proportioned to what the landlord may have laid out upon the improvement of the land or to what he can afford to take, but to what the farmer can afford to give. Another quote, as soon as the land of any country has all become private property, the landlords, like all other men, love to reap what they never sowed and demand a rent even for its natural produce. The landlord leaves the worker with the smallest share with which the tenant can content himself without being a loser, and the landlord seldom means to leave him any more. The landlord demands a rent even for unimproved land, like Churchill was saying, and the supposed interest or profit upon the expense of improvement is generally an addition to his original rent. Those improvements, besides, are not always made by the stock of the landlord, but sometimes by that of the tenant. When the lease comes to be renewed, however, the landlord commonly demands the same augmentation of rent as if they had been all made by his own.
Yep. I mean, if you heard that quote about how a lot of the economy is moving towards this model of you will own nothing, you'll rent everything, and you'll be happy. It's basically, I mean, I guess the landlordification of more and more aspects of society until, again, you're renting goddamn everything, you're owning nothing. It's very interesting how seemingly the landlord is like the eternal enemy, I guess, of the people.
Landlords are the only one of the three orders whose revenue costs them neither labour nor care, but comes to them, as it were, of its own accord, and independent of any plan or project of their own. That indolence, which is the natural effect of the ease and the security of their situation, renders them too often not only ignorant, but incapable of that application of mind. So even hardcore capitalist imperialists like Winston Churchill, even the father of capitalism himself, agreed with Mao that landlords were parasites. So landlords are hated, of course, and this article is going to articulate some of that for us today, for good reason. They don't really contribute anything to the economy. They hoard resources that everyone needs, and they have that power over you to both make your life worse and actually leave you homeless if they want to, because they can just jack up the rents however much they want in many, many countries, and also landlords can own as many properties as they want. So landlords are a scourge on pretty much every single country, and although there are levels of who is a bad landlord or who's a good landlord, at the same time, it doesn't really matter. They occupy a very unethical position that even hardcore capitalists historically have hated. But I just want to read Rhiannon's article here. It articulates a lot of the problems. So she writes, when I became pregnant with my daughter in 2019, it was clear we needed to move into a bigger home. My husband put his bachelor pad, a 1-bed flat in Clifton, on the market. He'd lived there for 2 years and I joined him for 1. We decided to rent a home on the western edge of Swansea where family lived nearby to help. Not an ideal situation, but we made it work. In an imagined future, we'd own a family home, but didn't have any real time frame in mind. We had more pressing concerns to deal with, such as having a baby during a pandemic. Home ownership wasn't something I was worried about at all, and the longer we rented, the more I thought we could rent forever. Then I received an eviction notice in the post, notice to vacate. It said on the official looking document that arrived in a brown envelope, it gave us 6 months to move out, the minimum according to Welsh law. We spoke with the landlord by email at the end of July, who said we could rent the house for another year. This was how we'd done it every year. We didn't have an up-to-date contract, but there was a tenuous family link. It was a shock. I was expecting news on a different matter, and only 5 weeks before we'd been told we'd have another year in the property. Now an eviction? But I didn't do anything wrong, I kept repeating. What are we going to do? In 2023, almost 26,000 households face homelessness as a result of Section 21, also known as a no-fault eviction, and had to go to the council for help. It meant they might not have done anything wrong, but the landlord wanted them out. Our notice arrived during the first week of my daughter starting school, who had done just 4 days there. I just moved her from another school nursery to start reception, spending hundreds on her uniform. We made a lot of decisions based on living in this house, like where my daughter would go to school and where my husband would work. When we signed the rental contract, the landlord told us he'd give us the first option to buy when he was able to sell. We were good tenants, we paid the rent on time. I bought a hedge trimmer just to take care of the garden. It feels unjust. We got the notice. I started calling estate agents to ask about properties in the village, and they told me that rentals don't come up. Not because there aren't any rental properties, but because once people move in, they stay put, and I can see why. The housing market is absolutely dire. If I could sign a 10-year ironclad lease, I would. While I acknowledge I have more resources than most evictees, it's still entirely crushing to go through. I have no plans to end my life, but I can't pretend that I haven't found myself thinking if I was dead, I wouldn't have to deal with any of this. Last month, when this happened to us, it felt as though we had lost everything. The government is right to ban these inhuman evictions, which are a key driver of homelessness. So there you have a story that I'm sure so many of you can relate to and have had even worse experiences.
I mean, yeah, as someone who was renting the house they're living in, yeah, that's a little concerning. Yeah.
And this person fully recognized the real mental stress uprooting your entire life because the landlord wants you out or wants to sell or whatever, and they give you 6 months to go when you could envision at least like your kid's childhood there, right? And more, we're seeing that so many people are forced to rent because they cannot afford to buy homes, and landlords can afford to buy homes, so they continue buying up property and forcing people into, for many people, rent slavery, right? So this person, I feel really bad for them reading that. It must have been a really stressful time. I hope if I ever rent and have a child, I don't go through something similar because, you want your kid to have a secure childhood. Luckily, in my childhood, we didn't move around too much, and I wasn't even really old enough to remember when we were renting and stuff. So I can appreciate, as someone who grew up in a stable home, didn't really have to move around a lot, never changed schools and stuff, that was a great experience that not everyone has because of things like being forced to rent all the time. Rhiannon Picton James published an article this week, and you're not ready for the whiplash here. People will rush to tell me it's wrong because profiting off the property market is wrong. When it comes to housing, all of a sudden everyone's a Marxist.
Okay.
Writing an article titled, "I hated landlords until I became one. Tenants are just ungrateful." So those two are...
Oh my god. I mean, it's funny because when I first saw the title of her initial article about about the regretting renting thing, I I was initially, minorly critical, I guess, I guess. But then as we actually read the content of the article, I was like, okay, maybe I was a little too harsh on you. Like, but there were some things that I saw that made me kind of raise my eyebrow, like her saying, like, why is this happening to us? We didn't do anything wrong. Like, as if you have to do something wrong for bad shit to happen to you. That's a very privileged mindset. So, but I mean, at the end of that, I was like, okay, I mean, maybe I was too harsh. But and then I see this shit. I'm like, okay, never mind. I guess I was too easy on her. I didn't go hard enough.
Articles came out, I think, within 1 year. One about how she's happy the government are ending these brutal evictions because they destroy people's lives and destroy their mental health.
No, I think she's happy.
I am a landlord now, and
I think she was happy they were ending because they were destroying her life. And I mean, suddenly, when it's other people's lives getting destroyed, it's like, well, I mean, well, I mean, they should be grateful I even let them live here. Yeah.
Yeah, I've experienced personally how hard it is to live in the unethical system as it's directly impacted me. Now I'm going to actually be the person who did that and actually say the person I was before the tenant is ungrateful. So let's get into this article. It's a bit shorter, thankfully. But everyone hates a landlord. It doesn't matter if you're a good one or not. I understand the hatred. As a student, I didn't see my landlords as business owners providing a service.
I love that she's at least self-aware enough to put good in quotation marks. Like she knows that nonsense is not going to fly.
That's good. You were smarter then. I saw them as fat cats living off my student loan. Yep, you were right then. Shame what's happened now. It's very easy to blame landlords. They make easy scapegoats for wider economic issues and inequality.
Wow.
Becoming a landlord myself changed that. We weren't fat cats. We weren't even making money from it. We were fair. We never charged for damages. We fixed things quickly. It was a constant source of stress and anxiety, and we were always waiting for the next neighbor complaint or the next breakage or a young person to lose their keys, requiring us to drive 2 hours each way down the motorway to let them in. So this person, I guess, became the selfless landlord who doesn't make any money, doesn't charge for any damages, goes above and beyond for their tenants. Like, they're actually losing money. They're providing like a shelter, I guess. It's hard work and a huge financial risk letting someone live in your biggest investment. Just because there are bad landlords out there, which there are, doesn't mean that being a landlord is inherently unethical. We were living in a one-bed flat that had no space left for a child to live in. Without time to sell, we rented the flat out while we lived in a 3-bedroom cottage that we rented from someone else. It was something to figure out later, we thought. Only later became half a decade, as we reluctantly worked incredibly hard as landlords at the same time as my husband worked a demanding full-time job, and I raised a newborn in a pandemic. We had it on the market, the sale fell through, and we put it back as a rental, and we tried again, and the same thing happened, and back as a rental it went. We couldn't afford to keep it empty because it meant we were paying for 2 properties at the same time. I'm so gutted for you. And on one salary. It was a difficult time for flat sales as the pandemic threw everything up in the air and fully remote roles seemed to be the future. There was less demand for properties in the city centre. We didn't actually make any money on it either, just enough to cover the mortgage. And it's hard work if you're doing it properly. There are constantly things going wrong, repairs which need to be made, plumbers who need to be called. There were times we talked about keeping it so we had somewhere to either physically live in for retirement or live off as a retirement plan. But ultimately it was too much stress and risk and manage, and in December 2024, we finally had a sale complete. The straw that broke us was a tenant who stopped paying rent, which meant we were going to shortly be in a position where we wouldn't be able to pay our rent either, because you're a parasite. And someone who has been both a tenant and a landlord, I don't think we were doing anything unethical. We rented to young professionals who did not want to buy, and NHS workers on temporary contracts. They were new to the city, in new jobs, and wanted somewhere temporary to live while they worked out what they wanted to do. There is a housing crisis, yes, but there will always be people who want to rent, and abolished landlords won't change that. Landlords provide a necessary service. That doesn't make us bad people. It's so funny to see someone who's experienced why landlords are bad and then literally articulates why people hate landlords, because yeah, you're taking people's money as like your retirement plan. And also, we're meant to feel bad for all the stress it caused you. You chose to move out. You wanted another property.
Is they give you the property.
You could have just stayed in the flat you had. Then you could have been trying to sell that while buying another property.
Is they give you the property.
Instead, you chose to move out and rent somewhere and use someone else's income to cover that lifestyle. But you didn't need to do that. You didn't need to do that. And you weren't providing a service. Providing a service would be like the government creating social housing, which has subsidised rent or no rent at all. What we used to have in the UK before Thatcher sold them all, that would be a service. Charging someone to either pay off your own mortgage or profit off them to pay your living expenses, that's not providing a service. Yes, you probably think landlords aren't that bad because you aren't making loads and loads of money and you think you treated them fairly. And it sounds from, if you accurately describe what happened, you're not as bad as massive slumlords or absolutely nightmare landlords. If you truly were on call 24/7, never charging for any damages, being like a great landlord, as much of an oxymoron that is, then yes, maybe you could feel hard done by a little bit. And because someone didn't pay their rent on time, you get mad. But also, you've experienced what it's like to be treated poorly by a landlord. Now imagine if you didn't have financial means and they were kicking you out. Surely you can sympathize. Surely you can sympathize of someone not having money to pay rent. And also they missed their rent payment. You've had a shitty experience as a tenant. So that should be the argument for we should get rid of landlords and create more social housing. Not we should have more landlords because they provide a service. And again, from a purely capitalist argument, many old school capitalists, literally the guy who created capitalist theory, he disagrees with the notion that landlords are providing a service because he was against landlords himself, saying that like everyone suddenly turns into a Marxist because they're talking about landlords. No, it is just like with resource hoarding, which includes housing, most people can see that's bad. And you were resource hoarding. You didn't have to rent another place and rent out at the same time. I don't think people have any sympathy, and it seems like this person has some sort of financial means. And although you might say this isn't technically no ethical consumption under capitalism, because she isn't consuming in the way we understand, I left this just for the end of the video. She says right at the end of the article, people will rush to tell me it's wrong because profiting off the property market is wrong. And when it comes to housing, all of a sudden everyone's a Marxist. We don't talk about ethics when it comes to any other business models. Everyone is happy to
I don't believe that.
Even though the tourism is making rents soar for residents, forcing them to leave the cities in which they live. They take no moral issue with buying cheap clothes from fast fashion brands who profit from the unpaid labour of the working class. They are happy to use their phones, laptops and batteries, which are mined using child labour. Landlords provide a necessary service that doesn't make us bad people. So thank you for Rhiannon there, tying her
I mean, to be fair, it's not as simple as them being bad people or not. It's more like the role itself is what's in question is whether the role itself is ethical or not, not whether the individual people who are landlords are good or bad. 'Cause, I guess, yeah, like TheKavernacle said, if she did all these things that she said that she did, which, frankly, I'm not sure there's a reason to trust her, but let's, for the sake of argument, even if we trust her and she's a good landlord, this is still creating this situation where exploitation is possible. I write it in my notes, but the fact that even landlords can't pay rent means that they're desperate people, and desperate people tend to be a little less ethical. They tend to use their power to exploit other people, which you don't want. You definitely don't want that in general, but specifically for someone who's in control of other people's housing, which one of the most basic and important things people need to survive. I'll get into a little bit more after the video's over.
The argument we've been seeing today. So her actions aren't bad at all because capitalism is bad and unethical, and you're a hypocrite if you criticize her. But again, that is the logic of so many people because they inherently know what they're doing is wrong. So if you know what you're doing is wrong, you have to find some sort of way to rationalize your actions, because I guess most people, if you know something's wrong, you want to do the right thing. So if you're doing something bad, you know it's bad, well, you justify it by, I could be worse. I could be a worse landlord. And also, you can't criticize me, you consume stuff. But again, there's so many levels to it, and it is not an excuse for being a shitty person. There's always going to be worse consumption. No matter how bad your consumption is, no matter how shitty the company you work for is, there's always going to be worse. And you can't use that as an example of, oh, well, I'm not actually that bad then. That is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.
All right. That was TheKavernacle. I've seen some of his stuff before, I think.
What you guys think in the
Definitely.
comments. And if you made it.
Definitely interesting stuff. But yeah, let's just, I guess, run through my notes. Yeah, I definitely that thing that was initially just a kind of a flipping of the script in the sense of why we talk about no ethical consumption under capitalism, but why we never talk about the lack of any ethical production under capitalism. It kind of reminds me of the I guess fact that, like, in recycling, where it's like, like individual people like you and me cannot really recycle enough to put a dent in the things. But, or is it recycling? It's something, because I'm thinking about how, like, a lot of ocean liners, specifically, like not ones for like cruises or whatnot, but ones that like ship freight from, I guess, across the ocean, those will like single-handedly produce more greenhouse gases than like entire, I don't know, states or whatever of cars driving around. So it's like, we'll sometimes talk about how trying to reduce carbon emissions from an individual perspective, when in reality, like, we really should be looking at how do we reduce carbon emissions of, freight and ocean liner type things. It's coming back to the whole compulsory individualism thing, where it's like, I mean, at the end of the day, trying to fix things like this from such a bottom up kind of angle is really difficult, or even just not efficient at all. Like, it's way more effective to attack this problem from a top down angle, where you're going after the sources of production, which are, generally speaking, much fewer in number than these sources of consumption, which are basically every single one of us who is not like filthy, stinking rich kind of stuff. And I saw a lot of that showing up throughout the video in terms of like the arguments that people were making, where it's like why do you keep why do you keep coming at this from the approach of individuals alone trying to solve the problem? Like, I mean, it's obvious that one person can't do anything about these problems. I guess it's just because in America, and I guess a lot of the West, any kind of, well, socialist thought, like really quote unquote socialist thought, which is just people organizing to do things, has been totally crushed. So like the average citizen cannot imagine, organizing with their fellow people to like accomplish these things, which can only be accomplished, by groups of people, not by select few individuals doing whatever. I mean, yeah, I think that's where. I don't have anything else to add on that front. Definitely, other things I wanted to touch on. The idea of another compulsory idea that I don't think is necessarily related to the individualism thing, but just this constant. Whenever these sorts of discussions come up, it's always this idea of you who are unfairly benefiting from an unfair dynamic, you have to lower yourself down to like the lowest common denominator of the, down to the level of the people that are being oppressed for your sake. Like, it's almost never. There's almost never even just I mean, at least entertain the possibility for like the sake of knocking it down. Like, at least entertain the possibility of lifting up these exploited, the people in like the third world to your level, so they too can enjoy, these sorts of I guess fruits of capitalism, I guess. But yeah, for some reason, people just aren't willing to even like I said, even for the sake of shooting it down in an argument, they're not even willing to entertain these ideas. Maybe even more likely, they can't even conceptualize that as a possibility, which is a very, very interesting thing to note. But yeah, and then I also touched on kind of like the archetype of the landlord. It's kind of being like I guess everything's wrong with society. I mean, yeah, I was hoping to have more examples, but Photoshop and other kinds of software there have been over the years becoming more and more things that you no longer own. You no longer buy them one time and then you just have them flat out. They're all becoming things you rent from the metaphorical landlord. Yeah, it's definitely not helping society in any way, shape, or form. Like, it's just taking more and more money from people, which is one of the reasons why landlording, any sort of landlord sort of thing, regardless of whether they're talking about literal land or, again, software or other kind of services, it's kind of fucked, because it is a real easy way to just siphon more and more and more money from people, instead of just getting money one time from a customer and then maybe getting some repeat purchases from them later on when their product either breaks down or whatever. Or instead of that, you get to just skim. Well, I mean, I would say you get to skim a little bit of money off the top for a long period of time, but I mean, I think in this day and age, they're probably charging for rent, like for each installment of rent, the exact same price they would for like a normal buying it one time normally. So it's like, it's not even the idea of getting the same amount of money, but over a longer period of time. No, it's just getting more money just up front from the get go. But yeah. Yeah, I guess the last thing is just the idea that even landlords can't pay rent, and then that causes them to be desperate, which pushes them to be, like, even if you want to be a decent, good guy landlord, you yourself are probably also some kind of tenant to some kind of landlord, so you have to also pay freaking rent, and that puts you in a situation where you're desperate, which again, like I mentioned, makes people way more likely to resort to unethical behaviors. And like, it's like we're living in a society that produces desperate people. So yeah, it's not a surprise that things are turning out this way. Like, it's almost really more like there's no ethical action under desperation, under desperate circumstances sort of thing. And it's like, why are we creating a system that produces, seemingly as its product, desperate people who resort to desperate measures? I mean, lots of people have their answer, all kinds of answers to that problem, which I won't get into, mostly because I don't remember them all. I don't really understand them all. I'm mostly just here trying to figure out what's going on. Solutions are a little harder to come by. But yeah, great video. Definitely enjoyed watching it, even if some of the even if it was shining a light on some unfortunate realities of our time. Yeah, better to look that sort of thing in the face and turn a blind. Thanks so much for watching. Consider liking, commenting, maybe even subscribing. And if you're feeling particularly generous and of age in your country of residence, try visiting these links up in the corner. Anyway, here are some more videos to check out, and until next time, take care.